From this trailer, I knew that this film was going to be different from the typical horror movie, but I wasn't expecting the level of depth and intrigue in this story. It really takes you through an experience. Usually I avoid spoilers in these reviews, but because of the nature of this particular film, I have to get into some specifics. Also, this is a lengthy review, so I've added timestamps to allow people to freely go to the sections that might interest you more than others. To navigate through a topic or section, click on the timestamps below in the description. So what is this film about? Let's get into it. His house follows a refugee couple from Sudan who are given a chance to forge a new life in the UK. But it's not that easy, as there's an evil lurking beneath the surface, causing turmoil in their lives. I like that the horror comes from this couple's past demons. Their traumatic hardships that they've had to endure to arrive in the UK are essentially their undoing in many ways. First of all, this film is a standout for being one of few horror movies that's centered around a black couple. Something we rarely see in the genre. In another film, this would have been a white couple. It really shows how much the film industry is changing as it tries to reflect the world we live in and give us more films that have people of color leading, rather than being in a supporting role, or worse, expendable characters. That's why I'm happy that more black directors are coming up and creating wonderful stories that aim to tackle some of the more widespread topics that black people can relate to. Jordan Peele, Nina DaCosta, and the director we are going to touch on shortly are killing it. Remi Weeks, who wrote the screenplay, and even more impressive, he went a step further and directed this film, making it his debut as a director. You can tell the level of care that went into this film under his oversight. Every shot, scene, and the overall aesthetic and vibe is just expertly done in a way I honestly thought that this film was done by a more seasoned filmmaker as opposed to a newcomer. This is why I'm always in favor of studios backing new filmmakers rather than relying on the same old talent in their stable. Weeks is definitely a director that many people should keep an eye out on, as I'm sure whatever he attempts to do next will only further elevate his budding career. As great as the material and direction is, none of it works without the cast, especially our two leads, who based on their body of work, really are the perfect pair to lead this film. Wunmi Mosaku is an actress that I'm used to seeing pop up in a number of British-based productions, for both television and film. This woman is just amazing in whatever she does, and it's no surprise she's finally getting a due, by now becoming a recognizable presence, not just in the UK, but also stateside. Here she plays Rial, in a performance that has landed her a Best Actress nomination. Watching this film, I had no doubt she wouldn't receive some sort of recognition. The emotion she has to convey to show her regret and the anguish she's facing really sells the character's pain over her past. It makes you sympathize with her character more so than her husband. Next up is another wonderful British talent, Sope Dirisu as Bal, Rial's husband. I'm constantly being surprised by this guy and his range as an actor, first in The Gangs of London and now in this film. He really levels up here, delivering an equally compelling performance as his on-screen wife. There's so much to his character, and seeing how his arc plays out really is one that feels rewarding by the end. This is a man who has desperately tried everything in his power to get out of a bad situation, and has had to make tough decisions for the better of his family. But in the end, was it worth it? It's interesting how the director balances out these two characters and their presence in the film. At first it seems like Bal will be the more prominent presence, but then there are scenes like the hospital scene, which makes it clear that both actors are here to pull their weight. In horror movies, it's easy for filmmakers to get carried away and become overly reliant on the standard tropes associated with the genre. One trope that's overused is the jump scare, which is done to create tension and surprise the audience. Here, we do get jump scares, but they are utilized in a way that seems carefully placed within the story. It never feels excessive. Perhaps one of the biggest tropes that is the centerpiece for this film is the house. Usually in horror films, houses have a tragic or gruesome history, and despite that, people still end up moving into them. And slowly, strange unexplained things start to happen. And you know the rest. What we do get at here, as this is a horror movie after all, but it doesn't give us beat for beat cliches to make us go, I've seen this already. This is nothing new. No, they add so much more to the proceedings that it really reminded me of Get Out and the way it completely changed how people viewed horror films. The subject matter here really is something that I've yet to see the genre tackle And that's what makes this story relevant to the times and one that will surely end up being timely in the years to come. So, let's get into some of the deeper themes and subject matter explored in this story. Immigration is an issue that the film focuses on right out of the gate. I think they managed to handle it in a way that people who are perhaps ignorant towards this ongoing problem will now have a clear picture as to the impact it has on immigrants hoping to make this country their home. The UK has always had an influx in immigration over the decades, which has had a major impact on the society. Despite it being the norm for the country, there are still many who are vocal about it and stand firmly against it. The time we spend with Bal and Rial in the detention center is short but enough to show the inner workings of one. It really is sad that, in some ways, you're escaping one horror and landing in another. The process and the system designed to become a citizen is one that is challenging for many foreigners. Here the film gives us an insight into the system through the lens of asylum seekers, who, even after all they've had to face to come to the UK, are tossed in a detention center for an unspecified amount of time. While they are together, they are very much isolated. It's a prison designed to break your will, and until a decision is made by the higher-ups, your life is in limbo. You can end up back to where you came from, or if luck is on your side, you end up being let out on a temporary basis. Your life is still not yours to live, even with what many will assume is freedom. It is in fact oversight. There are rules set in place to keep you from truly living. If these rules aren't met, and the people who are in charge don't think you have met their criteria, then they can easily force you back to square one. You are at their mercy. Our couple through luck manages to get out of their predicament, and are given a house to live in until further notice from the higher-ups in charge of their case. Even though it's a step in the right direction, it really is just one of many obstacles they have to endure going forward. With Bal and Real, we see how two people from the same background take to a new environment, and how that can enforce change in their lifestyle. Of the two, Bal represents someone who is quick to adapt to a new place by embracing change almost immediately, as he is keen to fit in and make himself less of an outsider to the people around them. We see him essentially putting on a mask of sorts and throwing away his identity little by little to become more like the people and the country he upholds more than his roots. I'm always fascinated by people who go overseas and within a short time they change their accent or some aspect of themselves, perhaps because they can, or maybe to feel more inclusive as they aim to adopt their new home as their own. But really, is it necessary to change to fit in? Or is it a personal choice? Or something that is necessary for survival? When a person moves to a new environment, in most cases it represents a fresh start. And in our couple's case, it's the opportunity to rebuild their life. But while seemingly on the same page, they both approach their new life differently. Bal is trying to be more British by the way he talks and even in his actions. On the other hand is his wife Rial, who is less swayed by the new society. She has to call her home. She is happy to be her usual self, even if it goes against the wishes of her husband and the people who see them as outsiders. This is a woman clinging on to her identity and not letting go of her roots, while her husband is trying not just to change himself, but also her. I love how the film shows us Bal picking up habits that are common to Brits, and naturally how that affects his wife, who has her own thoughts about it, but out of respect, doesn't call out her husband's changing habits. At least, not straight away. One of my favorite scenes is a small moment that effectively shows us Bal's change, even affecting simple things at home, such as dining. His wife has prepared dinner and laid it out on the floor, waiting for her husband to join her. As soon as Bal arrives, you assume he's excusing himself to wash his hands. But nope. You hear cutlery, and he presents it to his wife, who seems surprised, and rightfully so. Normally they would both use their hands to eat, but now her husband is trying to get her to start eating with a knife and fork. That's not even the most telling of how far her husband is convinced that taking on these habits will improve their way of living. He straight up tells her that using a table would be better next time. Also, when Rial lets him know that all she can taste is the metal, he insists that she will get used to it. Now there's so much you can take away from that scene, and how it's used to shape the audience perception of Bal and his character. That's just some of the things that I appreciate what the director is able to showcase in these smaller moments, which do so much for the larger story. Another scene that I like is his wife, for the first time since settling into their neighborhood, decides to venture out on her own. We see her faced with prejudice and what can be perceived as black on black racism. She is lost and has no choice but to rely on the help of some young black schoolboys, and they take jabs at her accent and the way she pronounces certain words. It really is uncomfortable seeing her being disrespected in that way. To make things worse, they mock her further when she speaks her native language and tells her she should go back home. This is something that many foreigners with thick accents and those who are unable to adjust to speaking fully in English have to endure. Understandably, there's a need to speak English since it is the main language in the UK, and to communicate effectively with most people, you have to be able to speak their native tongue. But it still doesn't excuse people from acting nasty towards others who communicate differently. This is the only scene in the film where we see other black people in the community where it is a mostly white populated area. I'm sure she had some relief seeing someone that is like her in terms of her skin color, but to find out that even that is not enough, to have some sort of familiarity and some sense of kinship, despite being from different backgrounds, is a wake-up call for what she can expect from this new environment. It really shows that racism doesn't just exist between white and black people, but also between different groups of black people. As someone who lives in the UK, I've seen a divide between the black Caribbean and black African community. While it's not widespread, it is very much something that is an issue that us as a race have yet to address. A character who is used to represent the system and their approach with immigration is Matt Smith's character, Mark, who is the couple's caseworker. This is a role that I never expected the former Doctor Who star to play almost to a T, but more on his character's part in a minute. The racism in this film is sometimes verbal, and other times it's non-verbal. They all feel very timely and warranted, given the subject matter of the film. The latter really drives home how, regardless of being in a multicultural society, there are many barriers and divides in place. People can be openly racist, not just through their words, but their actions. This is evident very early when Bal and Real are at the back of a van driving them to their new home and have questions regarding where they're headed. But they are ignored. You can tell that the people are ignoring them on purpose because they don't care about them and only just want to do their job and be done with it. Added to that, once they arrive at their new home, their belongings are dropped without care in the road rather than being handed to them. You can feel the frustration for the couple. These simple actions speak towards a bigger issue within the society. Foreigners are treated inhumane and almost like they are more of a nuisance to deal with. This is further shown later in the film when Bal tries to move out of their current home and his caseworker seems inconvenienced by the whole issue. He tries to convince him that he should appreciate what he has. His phrase, "Don't bite the hand that feeds you," really hits the nail on the head, that the people meant to help them really have little to no care for what happened to them personally. They are only there waiting for them to give them a reason to take away even the little they have been given. Even though we see countless examples of racism throughout the film, from various people and backgrounds, it really is nice that to combat against this view, they give us a brief glimpse showing us that not all people can be that way towards a specific race. There are people who are very much colorblind in the sense that they are aware of a person's race, but they don't view them as anything other than being human and just the same as any other person. Another thing this film highlights is the lack of respect that people have towards other cultures. There are a number of times that various characters who are British make a mockery or joke about the couple and the way they dress. It's something that many of us have done, either verbally or just thinking of, when viewing a person we come across who is different from what we perceive to be normal. We all have our views on different people and cultures, but really some of them are ill-conceived or just ignorant. And that's what makes it difficult for people to just view things in a different light and try to understand that even though someone is different, they shouldn't be undermined. Especially given a different set of circumstances where the shoe would be on the other foot. Yeah, I'm certain most people would hate to be laughed at and made a joke for being a foreigner. So before digging into someone based on their culture, race, or their dress sense, let's just be more sensible about how to deal with people. I really went into that theme a little bit too much. So let's get this review back on track. Of all the themes I've discussed so far, which are important to the couple's race, the most important in terms of what drives our characters and their actions is the grief and guilt they are facing. As I've mentioned earlier, to get to the UK, they've had to endure a heavy loss, which has stuck with them and affected the couple differently. We see Bal choosing to bury his feelings towards it by refusing to even acknowledge what happened. He is ready to leave the past behind and make the most of their future. Rial is dealing with her grief by choosing to hold on to the pain and keeping the memory of the deceased alive. Again, this is another parallel the film gives us between the couple, showing us how people deal with grief differently. But this is more than just grief that's factoring into the couple's feelings. This is also regret about something that's only made their loss, one that is their own making. It's hard to deal with, as both parties have different ways in which they are using to cope with their loss, and have yet to properly address it until it resurfaces in their lives, making it something that neither can ignore, especially Bal. Yeah, I wish I could delve into this more, as it gets really interesting the more the film sheds light on their past, and the pain that both characters now have to confront when their past comes back to haunt them. So I think I've discussed enough of the more deeper themes and aspects to this film. So with that, let's move on to the more technical side of things. The cinematography in this movie is just right for the tone it sets. There's a bleakness to the whole film that's present, even with the much happier moments we witness. Shadows are always present inside their home, perhaps to convey the constant darkness looming over their lives. A darkness that begins to present itself to them the more they try to settle into their new life. This brings me to the visuals, which are great for such a small film that's set primarily in one location. The house itself, while not appealing as it hasn't been maintained until our couple moves into the property, really is the perfect location to have this story unfold. The creaky floorboards, the dingy surroundings, from the old furniture to the walls with its peeling wallpaper, really creates an atmosphere that's almost oppressive, as well as one that reflects our character's peril. Once Bal becomes obsessed with getting rid of the unseen anomaly, tormenting their lives, seeing the house become even more disheveled as he tears apart the walls, visually represents the state of his relationship with his wife, becoming increasingly strained and his own sanity falling apart, even when he's in denial. The house is used effectively to transport us into some hauntingly beautiful dreamlike sequences. One scene in particular is of Bal just eating on his own in the kitchen, and you see the camera slowly pans out, showing that it is only a part of the kitchen, floating in a vast ocean that's surrounded by fog. What plays out in the scene is scary, but the beauty of it really sucks you into the scene, especially with the orange color palette used for the short sequence. I love how all the imagery used to represent the evil, or as his wife calls it, an apeth, ties heavily back into their culture. It feels grounded, despite it being supernatural. The use of sound is at times even more scary than showing us physical entities. Just hearing the voices of people, the apeth, and even more unsettling, their dead daughter, really is enough to scare you, along with the creaking footsteps and numerous noises they use to indicate that a presence is within the walls of their house. The sound design is just as important as the visuals. There's a good balance between CGI and practical effects throughout the film, for a number of scenes, but I feel like the full reveal of the apeth really is a letdown in terms of the creature's appearance. The voice is perfect, but the look just seems far less creative considering some of the other creatures that came prior. Regardless, it doesn't ruin the film or the big climax. Now I know it sounds like I've given away a lot to the story, but believe me, there's still so much I haven't discussed that you will experience from watching this. I knew that going into this, that I would get a far deeper story that's lacking in so many horror films today, but I really had no idea that this story was going to be so impactful and leave me with something that stayed on my mind long after watching this film. That is always the sign of a great movie, and one that I'm happy to share with you, and hopefully your experience with it will encourage you to share this masterpiece with other people. It really needs to be mentioned with the great modern day horror films, because what it manages to accomplish is nothing short of amazing. Anyways, folks, that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the show. Please feel free to subscribe, like, and comment below. And hey, maybe this wasn't your cup of tea. And that's okay. Just remember to take care and stay safe.